Hello and good morning here to our second breakfast talk at the Angewandte Festival Space. I'm Lena Violetta Leitner and I'm here your moderator today. In this Zoom meeting we have Alexandra Frusdorfer, Ege Kökel and Judith Benz-Schwarzburg. So hello to you and good morning. I'm very happy that you joined us and you're healthy and up for the talk. This is actually our second talk. Tomorrow will be the last one at the same time and the same space. And it is also accompanying a project which is called May I Introduce AILien? This is an online exhibition you are also invited to visit after the talk. And both the talk as well as this project are in cooperation with AIL or Angewandte Innovation Lab. So thank you very much. So we will start our talk now with some short introduction by your projects. I would invite Ege to start. Ege, you're an artist and a designer, and the project you're presenting, I think, is Dodo in the Room, which is also part of our exhibition project. And both Ege, your work, and Alexandra's work is based on human-animal relationships.
Okay, hello everyone, good morning. So I'm just gonna jump in. I'm a designer. I studied at the Angewandte in the class Industrial Design 2 or Design Investigations. I was always interested in science and technology and how the developments in this field could affect us in the future as a society. And I'm also working in a science communication company, BioFaction. Markus Schmidt was yesterday also one of the, he was also in the talk, and I'm working with him as well. And as you already mentioned, Violetta, I'm going to present my graduation project from last year, Dodo in the Room. As I said, I'm interested in science and technology, and for my graduation project, I was particularly interested in synthetic biology and the extinction. The extinction means the process of bringing extinct species back using different methods. For my graduation project, I focused on the method with genome engineering, and I found this topic very interesting, but I found it also very challenging from an ethical point of view. So I wanted to dive into this topic and explore it with a design project. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some visuals now. So in order to do that, first thing I did was building a real size Dodo model. I think as you already understood, I explored this project or this topic of the extinction with a Dodo. And yeah, I did this Dodo model. I took it with me to the subway just to see how people would react. Or I introduced it to the people on the street and asked them if they would like to have a Dodo, and if yes, what kind of Dodo they would like to have. Another thing I did a lot was spending time talking to scientists who are working with animals, as well as spending time with animals, particularly with birds, both living and non-living. On the left side, I was in a parrot house here in Vienna. On the right, I was in the Natural History Museum, and both institutions also helped me a lot during my project. And yes, all these experiments I did, all these conversations I had with scientists, all these interactions I had with animals helped me to narrate a project and narrate a story about the extinction through the lens of a companionship with a Dodo. And as soon as I added companionship also into my project got a lot more layered. Of course, it was about the extinction, but it was also about a lot of other things, such as, like companionship or interspecies relations, living together with animals, or animal welfare. In order to address those issues and ask different questions, I went on with building other stuff as well. So I made those other artifacts. They vary from like a catalog where you can choose between different dodo profiles, or a dodo egg, or a dodo muzzle. And all these artifacts are asking different questions. And this is also the point of my project, or the hope that I have with this project, is to generate a discussion around those topics. And yeah, all these experiments, and like the dodo eggs, the dodo itself, the catalog, or all my research come together in a short movie, which is also on the May I Introduce AILien website that you can have a look at if you want. Yeah, and for the exhibition, for the virtual exhibition now, I revisited my research from my project, and I realized how entangled our relationships with dodos were, even though we lived for a very brief period of time together. And yeah, I look at these bits and pieces of this history, and it's now the project is also tackles these bits and bits, and it's also talking about those weird weird connections we had with these animals. And I zoomed out a little bit from this companionship scenario, which is still a very big part of the project, but now the project tackles as well, like dodos being released in Mauritius, or dodos being shown in museums as museum specimens. And I took also a little bit advantage of having a virtual exhibition, maybe. As I said, the whole point of my project is to generate discussion, to ask questions and talk with people about this topic. And I hope that maybe by going online, that we could reach more people. That there is, and I can maybe generate a more diverse discussion around this topic. So there is an interactive part as well on the website where people can just leave me notes about their hopes, fears, opinions, or anything. Yeah, I think that's briefly all about me and my project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ege, for sharing your behind the scene and the pictures. We will now continue with Alexandra's work presentation. Alexandra, in fact, is also organizing the whole project together with me and the AIL. And today you're going to share Making Odkin.
Yes, thank you, Violetta. Yes, I will just, I have a few connection points to Ege and also to Judith, who is also in the research field of human-animal relationship and animal cognition. And my connecting points to Ege, which I want to pick up, is the living together with other species, but also not the de-extinction, but in my case, it's rather about extinction or not extinction. So a little bit to my background, it's kind of similar to Ege's. We actually studied in the same class. I graduated 3 years ago. We studied industrial design. It's now called design investigation, which interprets the term of design a bit broader, so in a more experimental, more critical way. So it's still officially called industrial design, but it's a more critical approach towards industry and industrial processes, which is also what I'm really interested in. So at the moment, like I have my own studio in the 6th district, and work mainly on social design projects and in design research. And especially my design research projects, I'm rather interested in the implications of our economic activities to our ecosystems and our natural environments. And this was also, this is also what the project is tackling in a way. So Making Odkin, the project I developed for May I Introduce AILien now, is actually based on my diploma project from 3 years ago. And my diploma project was a rather anthropocentric approach to the idea of balancing nature. What I did was I researched mainly into invasive species and how the interconnections between our human activities like trade and mobility are responsible for the spread of invasive species, which are species that cause trouble in our environments and which were mostly brought into other ecosystems by humans. So what I did was I proposed the idea of setting up a 3-course menu of 4 invasive species to reduce them out of the wilderness. So in a way, to balance nature, to give our native species more room by eating up the invaders. During my diploma, I already felt very ambivalent about this idea. I just wanted to share the screen actually, which I forgot now, but I will do so now. So this is actually what it looked like. So it was a 3-course menu and the whole dining experience around it. Of course, it was mostly about raising discussion about the topic. And it was already set up a bit in an ambiguous way. So it was more about getting to know about our interconnections with the natural systems we kind of mess with. Like how I mentioned, I felt very ambivalent about the whole idea of using economic exploitation, which is eating things and using it in an economic manner, using economic exploitation as a solution, but in fact, it's actually part of the problem because many of those invasive species were brought into other ecosystems because we wanted to have economic benefits from them. So that's what this thing which was troubling for me throughout the project, I wanted to fix with this new project, Making Otkin, which is rather an anti-anthropocentric idea and approach to our role in our natural environment. I just give you a straight up glimpse into the project. My proposal is a near future home in 2025, where we live together with other species to, in a way, connect with other species and with our role and their role in our environment. So in a way, it is a deliberate experiment to open up our spaces, our homes, our cultural spaces. For me, the home itself, the house, is always the dividing border between us, between humans and nature, between culture and nature. And this very open, very abstract house is one first experiment in how could our relationships to other species and also our predominance or dominance in our relationships could shift maybe. So it's actually a design narrative where I have protagonists, non-human protagonists in the home, and the home is a space for not only encounters and living together, but also working together. So the idea is that those natural systems we messed up, there won't be any quick fixes to this, but it might actually be real work to keep some of the nature or what we call nature. This is the space for those things to happen. I think there was the introduction to the project, and I'm super happy to be part of the exhibition also. And as Ege already said, we have a visitor space which I actually can visit here and can show you a little bit. So, for example, in my case, I have a space where you can share your multi-species moments. And there's already one which was an attempt of me trying to befriend a crow. So people can just share the images, videos, or stories, and we will share them in our gallery. And of course, for every project, we have an extra visitor space. So thank you. And I think I will give over to Judith. And we were super happy that we have Judith in the boat because she really touches many of the aspects Ege and me are talking about in our projects. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go over to Judith. We are very happy that you are here, and show us maybe also your multi-species moments and your ideal dodo.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. And we already had a very intense and very interesting meeting before this took place, the three of us, Ege, Alexandra, and myself. So I know that there's a lot we can discuss about. But first I would also like to introduce myself a little bit. I'm a philosopher. I studied philosophy with a focus on animal ethics at the University of Tübingen and did my PhD in an interdisciplinary postgraduate school on bioethics there, addressing the interface between animal cognition and animal ethics. So I was dealing with the question whether animals have culture, language, and the so-called theory of mind. These are all very sophisticated, usually very sophisticated abilities. We have usually ascribed to humans only for decades or centuries. And now, since there is ongoing research on animal cognition, especially intense since about 60, 70 years or so, all these abilities as sort of a divide between humans and animals are crumbling. So we can now see that animals, depending on how you define it, but animals also have sort of cultures, like tool-use cultures, for example. In some animal species, this is even going beyond the sphere of eating habits and so on, and goes to other areas like self-medication or social rituals and so on. We see that in chimpanzees, for example. We can also see that animals have sort of languages, at least in the sense that they have, for example, concepts. So they possess concepts. They know that some animals show that they know that green, red, yellow are instances of color. So they know a category like color, and they know the sub-entries. And this is very typical for concept possession in philosophical theory. And there are attempts to define those abilities in a way that animals are not excluded right away from the beginning. Since 2011, I am now at the Messerli Research Institute, which is an institute belonging to all three universities in Vienna, the University of Vienna, the VetMed University, where we are also situated, and the Med University. So I'm a philosopher working at the VetMed, which is kind of strange also, but yeah, it fits somehow. And the institute is really something special internationally because we are having, I think now with all the people working there on third-party funding as well, I would guess it's about 60, 80 people or so associated to us or working with us on the human-animal relationship. And they do so from an interdisciplinary perspective. So we have a comparative cognition department working with dogs and wolves and kia. These are mountain parrots from New Zealand, very innovative animals, curious animals, and with pigs also, with frogs even. So there's a range of labs associated to us or belonging to the institute where people do behavioral observation. Then we have a comparative medicine department working between human medicine and veterinary medicine, starting from the assumption that there's something like one health. So we share an environment, and therefore also health issues are interconnected somehow, and the solutions we need are also interconnected. And then there is the Department of Ethics or the Unit of Ethics and Human Animal Studies. That's the unit I am a member of. My boss is Professor Herwig Grimm, and we are working on a big range of ethical issues. I am assigned to the part of the unit that does exactly the research between animal cognition and animal ethics, but I'm also addressing a range of other topics I'm interested in, like extinction, for example. I dealt with the status of great apes in specific, the mountain gorillas in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because there is a very strong philosophical initiative to ascribe something like human rights to these animals, like a right to life and a right not to be tortured and a right to freedom. So I was interested in how we actually deal with these animals in the wild at the moment, and we are driving them to extinction, right? At the same time, we are also very strongly trying to protect them. I mean, these species, like also the white rhinos and so on, are really protected night and day by rangers as long as we can. These are also civil war areas, so sometimes the rangers have to leave, unfortunately, but yeah, so we try very strongly to save those last representatives of our next kin, right? Because that's what great apes are. And they have sort of a special standing, which is also interesting with regard to companionship and alien status and so on. So some animals are closer to us than others, obviously, and great apes are very close. So the extinction conservation issue I've addressed by focusing on great apes. And another interest of mine is the portrayal of animals in the media, not just in movies, but mainly in picture books, because I think children are the conservationists of tomorrow, right? And it's very important what we tell them about animals and how the narratives in any media that focuses on children talks about animals. And this applies to books and cartoons, but it also applies to the zoo as a narrative that brings wild animals to children mainly, or to families. And it includes also the portrayal of animals in contemporary art. Some time ago, I was invited to the Beuys Archive in Germany to give a talk on animals in contemporary art. That's how my interest in this area started. And I'm trying to combine it with my other research interests, in specific with my interest in animal cognition and in very complex abilities in animals, like cultural language, theory of mind, and lately morality in animals. Since last year, I'm PI of an FWF project on morality in animals, and trying to find out to what extent animals have abilities like empathy, and how we have to define these abilities in a de-intellectualized way, so that we actually can talk about these abilities in animals, but also in children. Yeah, so what we see in the past few years in animal ethics is that we had a very strong focus on animal welfare. That's what Ege already stressed. So paying attention to kinds of harm we do to animals by not paying attention what they need, right? And we can extend that now by a range of ethological needs that are linked to complex cognitive abilities. Like, I mean, you can do harm to an animal in a zoo, not only if you don't feed her correctly or species appropriately, but also if you don't provide an animal that has a culture with an opportunity to act out these cultural habits. That's why we have enrichment devices like termite mounds, artificial termite mounds in zoos now since a few years. So there's the welfare issue that gets broadened somehow. On the other hand, we have a very strong discussion in the past 20 years already or so to go beyond welfare and not reduce everything that has to do with ethics and animals to the idea not to do them physical harm or even psychological harm, but assess in a more profound way what other kinds of harms animals could be faced with. And these are issues like dignity violations, for example. So we are talking about dignity or integrity in animals increasingly. And integrity has, for example, been defined, just so that you can make sense of this a little bit, as problems that have to do with the fact that animals cannot show their species specific behavior. That's very close to the welfare thing. but also that the wholeness of animals is violated. And we see that with processes in genetic engineering, for example, right? So if we try to create blind chicken to avoid some of the welfare problems, we are somehow infringing on the wholeness of a species. Or if we, you know, create super muscly pigs, I mean, we change the species and we change the appearance, but also the behavior by ways of what we do. And this is, you know, somehow transgressing a boundary. And the third thing with the integrity thing would be to create animals that are not able to self-maintain anymore. And we see that with some of the cruel breeds in dogs. We have changed dogs by breeding so intensely that some of these species cannot give birth in a natural way anymore because the puppies are too big and issues like that, or they can't breathe anymore because the nose is too flat and so on. So this is a really companion animal issue that is welfare related, but on another level, we could also think about phrasing that as a problem that has to do with the integrity or the dignity of an animal. Dignity has been defined, for example, as doing something to an animal or portraying it also as something which she isn't, right? Portraying her differently. So if we have bears in a circus driving bicycles, we have a very strong example of an animal that is portrayed not as the kind of being she is, but as something else. And that very often has to do with our entertainment interests. Which also brings me back to the issue of portrayal of animals and also the question what animals are doing in contemporary art, right?
Maybe that's a good point to focus on the two works we heard about, Judith.
Yeah.
Like you saw Alexandra and Ege's work, and both deal mainly with future scenarios on how we would live together with species, or maybe even become other species, like a mutation to something else. But they are two very different in how they show it, or like where is this aspect of domination. How would you perceive these two works, and would you as a scientist take something out of it for your own practice?
Yeah, I found both works very interesting, and I already told them. And the reason with Ege's work is that I also see a whole lot of different questions addressed in there, and not just very specific questions like welfare questions. These are raised, for example, by you know, her designing this muzzle for the dodo. There's an ongoing debate about dogs in the underground here in Vienna in specific, right? People are crazy about dogs in Vienna. There's a lot of discussion going on about that. So we have discussions about what color to wear in dogs, what muzzles to wear, and which of these devices are problematic with regard to welfare. But I think on a more general level, her piece is very successful in lifting the questions to an upper level, like the level of companionship per se. So this lady, she's so He's so convinced about what she's doing, and at the same time, it's so clear that this is very human-centered, right? There's a human being who wants to have a dodo because this is an exotic animal. It's fascinating somehow, and you know, she goes through with that without asking a lot about the animal's interests, actually, right? And so I think it is really questioning this solution of bringing or saving these species from extinction by making them our companion animals. And that's similar to Alexandra's work. I mean, this is a very funny way of turning the question around. It's counterintuitive, right? I mean, there's a problem that's driving them to extinction, and now we try to find a solution that is again very human-centered. And that's the same with what Alexandra described about her previous work. There is a problem that has to do with human consumption, and now let's solve the problem by consuming animals, right? So this is absurd. And I think that's really, they are doing a very good job in addressing these issues. I'm always careful, and I think that's something Alexandra realized when working on her previous piece. I'm always very careful about the methods we pick ourselves, as in your case, artists, to bring these things to attention, right? Because it's a problem if you want to do something, if you want to show something that is, as I would say, a valuable ethical message, by picking a method that is problematic ethically in itself. That doesn't make it better somehow. And I see that a lot in artwork, right? These pieces are often very provocative, right? Doing something that we would offend and we find offensive and disturbing, like killing an animal, for example, or doing harm to it, and then claiming that they want to make a point. And that's a problem. And I appreciate it very much that the two artists we have here today are working differently, and I think they realize that as a problem. And that's a big challenge for artists, I think, to find a way of including animals that is not hurting them at the same time, right?
Alexandra and Ege, maybe that would be an interesting point. What have been the reactions from the scientists you consulted when you did your actual present work?
I just start. Actually, it was very interesting to me because not really. I think the welfare, if I remember, of course, this was it now in the COVID times, so I didn't really have the chance to really put a virtual reality glass set on a raccoon, which is one of the narratives in my house. But it was actually really something I thought about a lot, because to me in the project, it's very important. That's why I also try to connect with scientists a lot. To have a certain credibility and plausibility also from a scientific point of view, and to have this realness about it, even if it's a super fictional idea and the whole house is very abstract, but the idea should be kind of, I want to be on the border between people kind of being confused about what it is about, but still finding it kind of plausible, and maybe this could happen in 10 years or something. So yeah, I tried to get in contact with animal, I don't know how to call it, Tiergärten, and try to research on who is actually, where do I find actually the animals I'm talking about. And then I was wondering, okay, how will I do it? Of course, they may have restrictions. If I come with this glasses and I want to put something on an animal, which maybe the animal doesn't want to, I didn't really think of doing it because I knew it was I knew it would be difficult. But I went through the whole process in my mind, at least. And another thing which another conversation I had with a scientist who is a raccoon specialist in the US. I asked him about what he thinks about living together with raccoons, interacting with them, and if he would, what he would do with the raccoon if he had one at home and would live together. And it was really interesting because he couldn't kind of make up his mind and make up his mind and think about a dream about it, what could happen there. But he was immediately concerned about health issues, like for both ways in a way. So about parasites the raccoon could bring into the home, and how the raccoon would feel. So this was interesting from this point of view. And on the other hand, because the three characters in my project are the crow, the pig, and the raccoon. And what I tried to do in my as a real life experiment was trying to bond with a crow in my yard, which I really felt was something where I didn't have anything to say in this, which I really felt quite fitting to the project, because I left breadcrumbs on my windowsill and kind of this was the whole success of it was if the breadcrumbs were gone, and this was kind of a very sensitive approaching each other, and sometimes I heard a flapping on the windowsill, and that was it. So and I really enjoyed this, not having contact and not intervening too much, but still providing something. So from this point of view, I would say that those are my two stories I can share from the project.
And yeah, I think it's quite challenging as an artist or designer if you want to raise questions about animals, and then you like finding ways of raising those questions without actually integrating animals in your project. But that was a challenge for me anyways, because I was dealing with dodos who are anyways not here. And yeah, it was a question at the beginning, maybe from another reason, because of another reason. But I stick to this idea, making a paper dodo and then working with it, and it worked pretty well. And through the process, I also realized that it is kind of good way to deal with this subject, because it's also kind of, you know, highlights this absurdness and unrealness and all these things. Also with, like, you know, synthetic biology, it's this alien creature which we don't know how it would look like. And yeah, the thing with the dodos also that we have so little documentation of these birds, so we actually don't really know 100% how they look like. So it was kind of all these things coming together, and yeah, led me to develop a way of dealing those questions using you know, a model bird and not a real world bird. And I think it's in terms of what kind of feedbacks I got from scientists, it just differs very broadly, because, you know, when I talk with scientists working in the extinction, they're seeing this project anyways as something they don't wish to happen. When you look at those projects, it's always like about captive breeding and returning to the wild, and not actually about companionship. But it is kind of a side effect that the society could, you know, create, and not it's not always the first thing that we want to happen. It's not happening. But yeah, through this companionship scenario, I think it's also questions other stuff as well, not only focusing on this. And yeah, and I think also an interesting thing was that people were interested in showing in museums the specimens with also cardboard birds. I got like a question if I would be interested in doing something like this, which is also an interesting way of, you know, dealing in museums with extinct species. Is that, of course, there is a lot of materiality that is lost with, you know, feathers and taxidermies and art in itself, but it's just an it asks different questions, and it has another materiality in it, I think.
And how did you decide with whom to collaborate, Ege, for your work? How did you get in contact? Because you're not from the field of biology, in fact.
Yeah, I like spend a lot of time writing emails, and I think Alex has there where we were just talking about it, and she explained the story. Maybe she would like to add to it. Yeah, I think it's just like writing a lot of emails. One thing that I found also important is contacting different opinions, because, you know, science is perceived as this ultimate truth, but actually in science there are also a lot of different opinions and different ways of working with different subjects. So I think for me at least, it's very important that I hear not from one point of view, but from several, and integrate all those into my work. or not, but that I that I have the understanding and the whole picture and not only one-sided thing. Yeah.
Judith, I think when we were looking for a scientist for this project, I want to now turn on the other side of the science, collaborating with art. I think Alexandra told us that your colleagues referred to you as the expert on working with artists, with this alien creature. So I'm interested, how is your work, your collaborations with artists perceived from the scientific field, from your co-workers, your colleagues?
Well, in general, I have the impression that I'm specifically interested in contemporary art, right? And I have the impression that not so many of my students and colleagues are really focused on that. I mean, in the sense that they engage in the topic somehow, or know a broad range of work or so. And this is also for sure not true for me. I mean, I've just started with that. There's so much artwork out there. And that's really something you discover when dealing with the topic. Animals are all over art. They are everywhere. And they are not just there as a topic, but they are also in the painting and the materials used and so on. So there are so many levels where animals are involved. And the real expert on this is Jessica Ulrich for me, in a German researcher doing research, or Giovanni Aloy, and people who have been publishing and working on these issues for a long time already. So my specific focus is on ethics, and that's something, on the other hand, I think many artists are themselves getting interested in, or have started to get interested in, because there are documents and initiatives showing that artists question the ethical side of their own work and come up with manifestos or ethical codes and so on. And that's I think that's a very interesting development. I mean, my colleagues in specific, I gave a talk on animals in contemporary art, and I think, and I included some examples, some very shocking examples also, how animals have been used in art. And I think they were really shocked. They didn't know. I think they didn't know that, and this is very strong. I mean, this is very, what artists do. This is also the intention behind lots of these pieces, is to, as I said, provoke with a very strong thing, like killing rats live on stage or so, in this very famous rat piece from Jones, for example. So it is, for ethicists, it's quite shocking how much cruelty is involved directly or tolerated by the artists, or used as a topic, even if they don't do it, but just pretend to do it, but raised as a topic. So this is really, it's very strong, it's difficult to swallow. I think there's a lot to do. I mean, and there are many levels on which we have to reflect on these issues. And as I'm always turning the question into the direction whether animal personality and animal subjectivity or animal agency is violated or not in a piece of art, this at least gives a specific angle. But again, this is an angle that people usually are not so accustomed to. So I think there's a lot to do. But I wanted to say to Ege and Alexandra, I found it really interesting, Alexandra, that you said when becoming friends with the crow, you felt that you didn't really have a say in this. So even as the artist, orchestrating the entire thing, but I think many of us can testify to that feeling when engaging with wild animals. So this is also an idea of a very reduced form of companionship compared to what we are doing with cats and dogs and guinea pigs and so on, right? So there's no touch involved. That's also a very interesting component. But obviously people have an urge to touch animals and to engage with animals in a way that they want to control the situation, that they want to control the animal also. I mean, this is the very, thing that a leash is doing, right? So I think in both of your works, it's very interesting that you're dealing with, for example, a dodo, but saying a lot about dogs, actually, for example. So you're dealing with a dodo, but dealing actually without our companion animals we have today. And that's something I really like. Or in Alexandra's work, dealing with wild animals to say something in the end about companionship and living with companion animals. I mean, because it gives this kind of reduced understanding and distanced understanding, and an understanding that gives much more agency and freedom to the animal. I mean, they can eventually they don't have to move in, Alexandra, right? I hope so. So giving them the freedom to leave and be left alone is something that is really contrary to the history of companion animals that have a life that is controlled by humans from the beginning, from breeding to how they die, euthanasia, for example, right? So this is all about humans interfering with the lives of these animals. And the more interesting idea is how we can create a life with animals that is not so much characterized by interference.
I have something to add on this, just a funny anecdote, because you talk about, you know, touching and how it's a sign of domination as well. I was in an exhibition showcasing the dodo in the room with the real dodo model, and a lot of people petted the dodo, actually, although it's not really, you know, this fuzzy friend who is willing to be petted from a human, and it doesn't also, you know, doesn't look like a very fuzzy friend. But a lot of people did it anyways without even, you know, you also not really touching anything in museums or in exhibitions. You're always careful. And it was interesting for me to observe that people did it without even thinking about it.
Yeah. And it's even more interesting as your dodo is not really touchable. Yeah. I mean, what happens if you put that on the street or in a museum? Do people still want to touch it? I guess to some degree they would still. I mean, even though it is alien. The color is alien. The shape is alien. It's very geometrical. So there's something cold, right? That's not this component of warmth of the fur and so on. I mean, touch is something really complicated and something that has been not researched in a very intense manner. I have a PhD student working on this, the issue of touch, also in morality of animals, because in a lot of moral behavior between animals, like comforting behavior, care behavior in animals, touch is involved. And what we often do is preventing animals from being able to touch each other, if we think about husbandry scenarios. So that's a very, very interesting thing. I wanted to tell you about something where the touch issue and companionship came to my mind lately. During the Corona crisis, I think it's in South Korea, they have used robot dogs to walk the streets and tell people to keep distance, right? So they use a dog, an animal that usually stands for touch me, I mean, for many people, to tell them to keep distance. That's really interesting. And they can only do so because this dog doesn't look like a dog. It looks like, you know, it's a steel structure and it looks very, but there is this ambivalence between an animal walking around, approaching them, and then tell them to stay away. And I mean, in Corona times, if this dog elicits people to come and touch it, to crowd together and to touch it all at the same. I mean, this is very counterproductive, right? So, I mean, this is I think a nice example where design ideas and ethical ideas and companionship and touch and so on come together and tell something about humans and our relationship to humans, but also about our relationship to animals in contrast to our relationship with technology, for example, right? I found that very interesting, that example.
And what do you think is like the ideal space or the room for a productive and balanced collaboration between art and science where both parties benefit? It's a question for the three of you. Maybe Alexandra, you want to start on this question?
Especially during developing those talks now, and we had lots of conversation before, of course. I really think what's important also is not only spaces for collaboration, which are, of course, not really existent at the moment. It's really hard to find really spaces for interdisciplinary work, which is not very informal. Like everything I do, all the people I contact, you're very lucky when you really get in contact with retired scientists, because they have still, if they still have a kind of passion for the topic, because they have time. And in the end, it's a lot about resources, also time-wise, but also from also space-wise, and not only space-wise, like from real spaces like rooms and buildings, but also from resources, funding, like the formalities of it, like the political formalities of it. But also, what's important also is not only for collaboration, but spaces for confrontation, because in collaboration, of course, collaboration, especially for me, it's very important, because I really want to dig in as much from the outside as possible. But also collaboration sometimes means a compromise, and you cannot expect from a collaboration that the world views you have in those teams, that they are all overlapping and that it's great synthesis what's happening. And sometimes this is good, I find it's good to have very opposing opinions and very opposing approaches, especially if you are from different fields. Of course, like getting closer to each other and communicating and have finding a platform to communicate. It's very important, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to compromise your own ideas or viewpoints, but that you so the space for confrontation and just getting to know the other's opinions is equally important as the spaces for collaboration, in my opinion. So the question what the ideal space is of course. It's very hard to tell, because I try to get out of, or to escape the bubble as much as possible. That's why I really value really getting in closer contact to scientists and other institutions outside our cultural institutions, the university, the museum. And also trying to find formats to include children and like to have a broader basis to generate a broader audience around those topics. And also what I really appreciate in Ege's work is that she really got out on the street and did lots of surveys and confronted people in public space also, which is also like the easiest tool, because you have access to it. So that's something very useful to use. Confront people in public space, and like we are doing now with the exhibition, confront public space in the virtual space. So this is also what Ege mentioned before, to make it open to an audience, except the very bubbly museum audience. So that's what I really liked about our project turning into the virtual space rather than being based in a gallery. Actually, both is very good and would merge together very well, but still this is a very positive aspect that turned out from this project. Yes, how do you see this, Ege or Judith? I think it's from both sides really interesting to know your experience or opinions on this.
Yeah, for me it's also very important, as you already said, just to hear other people's opinions from different expertises, and trying to find, a common ground that can be also sometimes not so common, but you kind of figure out the way. And I think what is also important is that it's a bit different or difficult, because we are hardwired to be productive, and then everyone is expecting these collaborations resulting in outstanding solutions or projects, and that you have one Skype meeting and you have an aha moment, and these kind of expectations are there, and it's also kind of expectations for ourselves as artists. But I think what I've seen, it's also very much valuable, those mundane interactions with scientists, where when you have a 1 hour Skype and after that you don't feel very inspired and you don't feel like you have like the one idea that will be the idea or anything like that. But instead, I think even if you don't feel like this, I think those kind of interactions manifest themselves later on in your project or in other projects or even in your personal life. And I think it's also important to be open those interactions and not expecting a lot from that. I think that's the only thing I will add.
And I just want to pick up one of your thoughts. I'm really happy that we got to know Judith in this during those talks, because for me this kind of what you said about kind of reaching out to many different people, many different scientists, and not like expecting the magic to happen immediately. But I think it's kind of a growing network. It's like I have the feeling that from project to project, it was so much easier in this project because I already knew people from the national park, and they said, yes, I have there the raccoon specialist, and I know people from. So it's something that's growing. So in the beginning, this is the first kickoff is always really hard if you dive into a new subject in a way, but now it's kind of growing, and you have something to show also, something to show the scientists, to convince them that what you do is actually that it is something in the end, and that it is something convincing or interesting. And so I think if you stick to one project actually, or to one topic of interest, it's easier from project to project, because you kind of you have your network already, and it only starts to grow.
I think what is really important, and you're doing that already probably, is to involve both natural scientists and people from the humanities. I mean, there's an increasing community from the humanity, from literary animal studies, from philosophy and ethics, and so on. Because I think if you show your work to scientists, they might find it probably, I would guess, they find it very interesting, also maybe even dominantly because of the ethical tensions they feel. I mean, lots of scientists deal in an implicit and not fully aware way with ethical issues. And a lot of what we do is making these questions visible to them as well, right? Or to society. So I think that's very fruitful, to not just think about natural scientists. I mean, I am a person doing a little bit of both. I'm really trying to include empirical research in my research and know something about cognitive biology as well. But also pure philosophers or literary people can really, I think, greatly advance the debate. That's one thing. I think the rooms for that, the rooms for exchange are really well picked by talks, panels, discussions, seminars, and so on. That's true. Also, the public space is important, and maybe spaces where animals are. I mean, Neo Zorn, for example, from Berlin with the Manteltier project, they went to the zoo and put their project there, which creates very interesting outcomes, I think, or going to the museum, right?
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I think unfortunately we are already at the end. Maybe just a wrap up and let you finish your thought, and then
sure. No, I just wanted to add what Alexandra said. We need programs and funding programs for really engaging in research together. And that rarely happens. The WWTF had a cognition call some years ago where that was transdisciplinary, but doesn't happen so often. What I can really recommend to all artists is joining the Minding Animals Network, because that's a transdisciplinary network involving artists deliberately and scientists and philosophers and so on. It's a huge network. There's a Minding Animals Germany group, and lots of Austrians are also found their way there. So this is something that might be interesting for you. And this is really growing, this entire thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Judith, for your talk, and also thank you to Ege and Alexandra. A big thank you to the Angewandte Innovation Lab again. Thank you for making this possible, and I hope you all tune in tomorrow to the last talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.